Welcome to the Boomer Briefing Podcast, where we help you solve a critical business issue in 20 minutes or less. I'm your host, Jon Hubbard, shareholder and consultant here at Boomer Consulting. And with me today is our CEO, Jim Boomer. Jim, thank you for being on this episode of the podcast.
You bet. Glad to be here, Jon.
All right. So we have a kind of a broad topic, but it's one we hear a lot about, and that's about disruption. And the title of this episode is Why is it better to be the disruptor versus the disrupted? So, Jim, as you think about all the changes firms are going through, why is it important for firms to think about, hey, we want to be the one causing the disruption, not the firm waiting to be disrupted?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's not an easy question. It's an easy question to answer, but it's not an easy question to actually execute upon. So, the way I look at it is when you are the initiator of disruption or the disruptor, you're really put in a position of strength because you can be proactive in your planning and strategizing. Whereas when you are the disrupted, you really are in a position of weakness. You're the victim of that disruption, and you're now in a defensive stance and reactionary. And I mentioned strategy and planning, and that's what we're working with firms on day in and day out. Not just about disruption, but how do you continue to grow and make your business better than it is today. And an example would be, hopefully none of us ever experience this, but your house is going to be destroyed, imploded. There's no way that it's not going to happen. You have two choices. You can just either have it happen and you out of the blue, or you can get, let's say, 2 weeks heads up that this is happening. I think most rational people are going to choose the 2 weeks so that they can plan and strategize and make sure that they're away from the house, that they've taken the things that mean a lot to them out of the house. And sure, it's going to be painful no matter which option it is. But having advance notice and being able to be in that position of strength makes all the difference for how you're going to come out on the other end. I mean, if we just look at examples throughout history of people who had the opportunity to be the disruptor, they had technology, they had knowledge, and they didn't do anything about it. And what happened to them? I mean, Kodak is the poster child for this, but so is Blockbuster, and more recently, taxi companies. And what it all boils down to is, in the moment, they're not feeling enough pain to force them to change in a positive manner and to disrupt what they have today. And so that is why it's so important to be thinking ahead and strategizing and planning. So just a few reasons. I could probably go on why it's better to be in that position of strength as the disruptor.
Yeah. And those examples, the Blockbuster, example, I think it's one most of us have heard before, but it's still an extremely relevant example of something we need to be aware of. It's hard to create that disruption when it's very comfortable right now. And so I think that's what you were hitting on. So as you work with firms to develop strategies, to plan for the future, to maybe cast a vision, things of that sort, what opportunities do you see for firms to actually be the disruptor? And what are some of your recommendations around how to best do that?
Well, there's a few things, Jon. I would start with, and I've mentioned it a couple times, the vision, and you just said it, vision and strategy. And so when we talk to firms, usually every time we ask, do you have a strategic plan? You always get yes. But then you ask a few more questions, and I don't consider that you've formally done visioning and strategic planning if it's still up here in your head. You have to document and you have to go through the thinking and strategizing process. That's just as important as the outcome of the actual plan. And so that would be the first thing, is be honest with yourself. Have you committed to casting a vision for what you want your organization and your team to become 5 years out? Paint that picture of what you want to be, and then commit to annually doing strategic planning and build it into your process. You've got to build that accountability in throughout the year. So keeping an eye on your progress, where you need to pivot throughout the year, because usually when you walk away from strategic planning, there's a few things on there that are already outdated and circumstances have changed. So visioning and strategic planning would be my number one recommendation. And even if you have one and haven't visited it in a couple of years, now is the time to do so. Second, I'd say really lean into innovation and invest in the innovation process. So creating some structure around it, naming the who's going to actually drive that initiative to create a culture where it's safe to be innovative, and that you don't view any failure as the end of the world, like looking at it as learning opportunities and the ability to fail forward. So number two would be investing in innovation. And even on that one, I would say make sure that you're setting aside the dollars and a portion of your budget to actually be allocated towards innovative projects. And then the third one would be just tap into your networks. We have peer groups, our circles at Boomer. And what we find from our members is the biggest value is to see what others are doing, what they've tried, what's possible. And often some of those things you'd never know about if they didn't come and talk to their peers from other firms, and if they didn't get outside of their own four walls. So commit to that, tapping into a broader knowledge base and expertise base to really drive you forward.
That's great, Jim. So I was kind of taking notes as you went through those. So you had three kind of key points. One was vision and planning, right? Developing that maybe 5-year vision, supporting that with a 1-year strategic plan. Number two, you talked about innovation. You mentioned the who, but also the process around innovation. And then three, kind of those peer networks, being able to learn and share either lessons learned or best practices or successes or challenges from peers as well. I think all those are great. If we can unpack a couple of those real quick, because I think all of those are really key components of initiating disruption. But let's start with the vision and the plan. When you think about disruption, you don't typically think about quarterly reviews or quarterly game plans, right? You don't typically put those together. But when you were talking about putting together a yearly strategic plan, right, going through that process and then pivoting, can you speak a little bit about how, when you have a vision in place and a strategic plan in place, and you are supporting both of those by having quarterly game plans with your team members, that kind of how that allows you to pivot?
Yeah, that's a great question. We live in a fast-paced world, and things are constantly changing. And so when you go through visioning and strategic planning, that is a point in time. And I talked about how some of the things are going to be stale when you walk out of there and outdated. You have to commit to that regular cadence, or you're going to miss things and miss opportunities, and you're going to have to make decisions to change and deviate from what you thought a month ago, a week ago, 2 days ago. And so that regular cadence is what really keeps you stepping back and thinking about your business and working on your business, rather than just constantly driving to serve your clients and working in your business. If you don't intentionally step back, then a year will pass and you'll go, wow, we didn't even think about how we could have capitalized on all these opportunities that presented themselves to us. So really that ongoing is critical to making it all work.
Yep. Excellent. It's amazing, especially post-COVID, how 3 months, so much can change in a 3 month, each quarter, so much can change, and kind of that continuous kind of focus there is important. So touching on the second kind of main idea you had there around innovation, we've done a lot of work even internally here on our innovation process. And as we are out talking with firms about, possibly them establishing an innovation process, something that firms seem to always be really intrigued by is our air traffic control process. Because when you think about creating disruption, how do you, and it may sound a little counterintuitive, but how do you organize the creation of disruption happening? Right. And I think the innovation process and the air traffic control process we've started to cultivate and get better at here at Boomer has been really instrumental in that. Would you care sharing just a few thoughts on our air traffic control process?
Yeah. Well, that whole process really came about because we put the work in to formalizing our innovation process, and it was working so well that great ideas were coming out of the other end weekly, monthly, and we had so many great ideas. And as a business and as leaders, you have to set the focus. You have to measure all these ideas against going back to that vision and your strategic plan and go, is this driving us where we want to go? Or is this deviating us somewhere else that's going to distract us and take us away from that picture that we've painted? So air traffic control is really about having some set criteria that help you to prioritize things of where your focus, your time, your resource, and your dollars are going to go. It's not an opportunity to kill projects or put them on hold forever. They go on the back burner at this point in time, and these are the things that we're really going to put our resources into. Otherwise, you try to do 100 things and you do 100 things mediocre, or you try to do 2 or 3 of them and you knock it out of the park.
Yeah. Awesome, Jim. Thank you. That process has been really helpful for us. And again, creating that focus really goes right along with creating the right disruption for your organization. So the third thing, and I'll just mention this, and then I have another question for you, actually, Jim, is around those networks, those peer networks. I was just on a call earlier today with members of our talent circle, and one of their big takeaways from the last meeting was how helpful it is when your firm is on the brink of possibly doing something disruptive, at least for your firm, to be able to be sitting across from someone and hearing that they just did that, or that, hey, that's on their radar too, and how some of these disruptive ideas or these disruptive strategies all of a sudden start to feel more real, and less pie in the sky and less, crazy, so to speak. And so, again, just wanted to kind of reinforce the value of peer networks as it relates to disruption. And I know you're always kind of preaching that as well, Jim, but I think it's worth highlighting here. So, Jim, there's, we talked about the why, we talked about maybe some of the opportunities and some of the how. What would you say to our listeners with regards to results around this? You get to work with a lot of firms, and you get to see firms that are maybe doing well in this area, or maybe have some successes in this area. What are some of the results that come to mind that if a firm is focused on maybe being more disruptive in the marketplace, what should they expect?
I've kind of touched upon the first one, I'll say, but I'm going to re-emphasize it. Is the number one result is you'll have forced yourself to think beyond today and what you have to get done to serve your clients. And it'll force you to, as I said before, work on your business rather than in your business. It takes you through that thinking process. You don't come out of a strategic planning session with all the perfect answers, but having gone through that process, as you get more information, you get more details to make better decisions. You've already done 90% of the work of thinking through it. And now you're in a position to be able to deviate or completely do a 180 and feel confident in that decision. So that ability to pivot, you're in a position to do it a lot quicker because you've thought strategically about your business. I think the other big one in a lot of these, whether it's strategic planning, innovation, or being with that peer network, you are exposing yourself to a greater mind share, a wider range of experience and expertise, and you learn what could impact your firm and our profession overall of things that you hadn't thought about or that were outside of, you had blinders on to it, or you didn't even know that you needed to know that. We often say it's what you don't know that cost you the most time and money. And by connecting to others and expanding your wealth, your wealth of knowledge, you're reducing the items in that I didn't know what I didn't know category. So those would be the two big results, I think, is you start to have a bigger view of what the opportunities are, and you're in a better position to be able to act on those and make informed, sound business decisions around them.
Yep, that's excellent. So as we round out our conversation here and come to the conclusion of this episode, Jim, what would your recommendation be for our listeners in terms of next steps? Maybe they really connected with this conversation and think, all right, our firm needs to be, disrupting a little bit more. What's the first step someone should take?
Well, I'd say step number one is, and I said it before, be honest with yourself. What have you done around creating a vision for your organization and for your team? And then what have you done around strategic planning to drive you in the direction of that vision? And if you haven't done anything, or if it's been a few years, commit to that process. Do it as soon as possible, because the longer you wait, there are others out there who are constantly thinking of new and innovative ways to run their businesses, and you may not even know it, but they're out there trying to disrupt you, and they're trying to take your customers. So commit to that visioning and strategic planning. Now, if you're out there and you're like, yes, we do that. We have a clear vision, and we do strategic planning annually. We're keeping that in the forefront throughout the year, and pivoting as necessary. Then I would say your next step is to really lean into the other two recommendations, which is create some structure around an innovation process so you can start to fuel new ideas within your organization. And two, look for peer networks that you can tap into and build your knowledge, expertise, and mind share, and accelerate your progress.
Awesome. All right, Jim. Well, if our listeners want to get a hold of you, what are the best ways they can reach you?
Well, they can find us all over social media. Boomer Consulting's on LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. For me personally, my handle's Jim Boomer, no spaces, no dots, both on LinkedIn and Twitter.
Awesome. All right. And I know you also have your contact information on our website, boomer.com. Easy way to get a hold of Jim there also. All right, Jim, as always, it was a pleasure chatting with you. Thank you for being on the podcast. And for our listeners, we release new episodes every Tuesday morning each week. We rotate topics across various categories, but all of those topics have a common theme, and that is they are critical to your firm's success. So as always, thanks for listening, and please subscribe. Thanks, Jim.
Thank you, John.